In the misty hills of Appalachia, sisters Rose and Maggie Harlow uncovered their grandmother's locked barn, expecting dust and silence. But what began as a simple day of clearing brush took a chilling turn when they came face to face with something impossible. Rose wasn't your typical mountain woman. After years photographing hidden wildlife, she'd learned to see what others missed. Yet nothing prepared them for the antlered, human-eyed creatures within. What started as curiosity became revelation, the moment that remade their valley, their family, and everything they believed about life itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains rose like old gods around her, patient, silent, unmoving, their silhouettes fading into mist as the late afternoon sun slanted through the ridges. Maggie Harlow kept both hands on the steering wheel as her rental car rattled up the narrow gravel road. The Smokies hadn't changed in 20 years. Same rusted mailboxes, same sagging porches, same hand-painted signs warning strangers to keep off private property. Only the trees had grown thicker, the shadows longer. She slowed as the road curved past the last mailbox before the old family land. E.M. Harlow. The letters faded, but still legible. Etta May's name. Maggie reached out, brushing her fingers across the metal as she rolled by. For a moment, she imagined her grandmother standing at the porch again, wiping her hands on her apron, calling them in for supper. But that was a lifetime ago. Now the house waited alone. The farmhouse appeared over the next rise, grey boards warped by years of weather, the front porch sagging like a tired smile. Weeds had overtaken the yard, swallowing what once had been Etta May's prized garden. The big oak still stood beside the well, though half its limbs were dead, reaching like skeletal fingers toward the hazy sky. A shape moved on the porch. Maggie braked instinctively, heart jumping. But then she saw her, Rose, sitting on the top step barefoot, a camera strap slung around her neck. Her long hair, the color of dried wheat, stirred in the faint mountain breeze. Rose stood and waved. "Mags!" Her voice carried down the gravel drive. Maggie forced a smile, climbing out of the car. The air was cooler here, heavy with pine and damp soil. She hesitated before hugging her sister, as if unsure how close they still were supposed to be. Rose didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms tight around her. "You made it," Rose said softly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Yeah, well." Maggie looked past her toward the house. "I guess I had to." Rose's smile faded. "You don't have to stay long, just long enough." They stood there for a while, letting the quiet stretch between them. The only sound was the hum of cicadas and the faint creak of the porch boards shifting in the wind. Inside, the house smelled like cedar, dust, and something older. A scent Maggie couldn't quite name. Time had yellowed the wallpaper, curled the corners of family photographs. On the mantel above the cold hearth sat Etta May's Bible, still open to the same page it had been for decades, Genesis 2:7, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground." Rose trailed behind Maggie as she moved through the rooms, her voice soft with memory. "I tried to keep it clean after she passed. Sheriff Tucker helped with the heavier stuff. Folks in town didn't come up much. They never did." Maggie opened the kitchen window. The hinges groaned. A faint smell of rain drifted in from the fields. "You hear what they've been saying?" Rose asked quietly. Maggie glanced over. "About what?" "About Grandma." "About the barn." Maggie turned. "What about it?" Rose hesitated, eyes flicking toward the back fields. "Just lights, sounds. Some say she was keeping animals out there even after she got sick." Maggie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Rose, you know how people in this town talk. They've been calling her strange since before we were born. Doesn't mean they're wrong." Maggie gave her a look, but Rose didn't meet it. She was staring out the window, past the dying garden, and into the tree line where the land sloped down toward the barn. They found the will that evening, tucked neatly inside the old roll-top desk in Etta May's bedroom. Maggie read it aloud while Rose listened, cross-legged on the bed like a child hearing a bedtime story. To my granddaughters, Margaret and Rosemary Harlow, I leave all property, lands and belongings, including the homestead and its adjoining outbuildings. Maintain the boundary fences. Do not sell the land. And whatever you do, never open the barn." Maggie stopped. The words hung there, strange and heavy. "Never open the barn," she said. "That's oddly specific." Rose tilted her head, thoughtful. "She was serious about it, too. Remember when we were kids? I tried to sneak in once, and she locked you in the root cellar for an hour," Maggie finished. "Yeah, I remember." They shared a small, uneasy laugh. But Maggie felt the skin between her shoulders tighten. It wasn't the words that bothered her so much as the tone of them, like a warning, not a request. That night the mountain fog rolled in thick as wool. Maggie couldn't sleep. The house creaked in the wind, and the branches scraped the tin roof like fingernails. She lay awake listening, to the crickets, to the hum of the refrigerator, to the faint, rhythmic sound of something moving in the fields. At first she thought it was a deer. But then came another sound, softer, stranger, like a low whimper carried on the night air. She sat up, heart hammering. "Rose?" No answer. Maggie slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the worn floorboards. The window over the sink looked out toward the back pasture. The barn stood there, half swallowed by fog, its roof sagging, its walls silvered with age. And near the door, she could have sworn she saw movement. A flicker of light, then nothing. She almost called out, but something stopped her. Instead, she watched. Something shifted in the darkness, too tall for a raccoon, too fluid for a human. The outline of it seemed to ripple, as if the fog itself were alive. Then came that sound again, a low, broken cry. Half animal, half something else. A hand touched her shoulder. She nearly jumped out of her skin. "It's just me," Rose whispered, eyes wide. "You hear it too?" Maggie nodded. They both looked back out the window. The movement was gone. Only the barn remained, silent, waiting. Morning brought sunlight and the illusion of normalcy. Rose made coffee while Maggie sat on the porch steps, the mug warm between her palms. "Probably coyotes," Maggie said finally. "Or feral dogs." "Coyotes don't make noises like that," Rose murmured. "You've been listening to too many ghost stories." Rose didn't argue. She just sipped her coffee, her gaze fixed on the barn. The padlock hanging on its doors caught the light, rusted but still sturdy. After breakfast, they walked down to check the fence lines. The air buzzed with insects, and the smell of wet earth clung to their boots. When they reached the barn, Maggie stopped. The wood was scarred, not just from age, from something else. She crouched, running her fingers over the deep gouge carved into the plank near the door. 3 parallel lines, each the width of a finger. Bare. Rose guessed. Could be. But Maggie frowned. The cuts were clean, deliberate. "I don't think so." Rose bent down beside her. The padlock hung slightly ajar, the latch strained. She brushed away some cobwebs and dust. "You think Grandma had animals in here?" Maggie stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "If she did, they're long gone." But when she turned to leave, Rose stayed. Her eyes lingered on the lock, the way the metal still gleamed faintly beneath the rust. "Mags, yeah? Doesn't it feel like it's watching us?" Maggie followed her gaze toward the dark slit between the barn doors. Just shadows inside, empty space. Yet for one brief second, she thought she saw a flicker of movement, the faintest glint of reflected light. Maggie turned and began the walk back to the farmhouse. The children followed her halfway, their laughter soft, almost musical. When she reached the edge of the meadow, she turned back once more. The forest shimmered. 1,000 faint eyes watched. From the dark, not menacing but welcoming, the watchers, older now, wiser, part of something vast and eternal. And at the center of it all, Rose stood glowing faintly, a figure of light and shadow intertwined, waving once before fading into the silver fog. Maggie smiled through her tears. "The Hollow remembers," she whispered, "and so will I." She stepped into the dawn. Snowmelt turned the valley to mist again, the kind that rolled low across the hollows like breath from the earth itself. The farmhouse had been empty for months, yet the porch still creaked as though someone walked its boards at night. The townsfolk said the wind made that sound, though most no longer took the old road to Harlow Hollow. Some things were better left to memory. Down by the ruins of the barn, spring shoots pushed through charred soil. In the right light you could still see the blackened outline of its frame, ghost ribs jutting from the ground. But life, stubborn as ever, threaded its way through ash. Ferns sprouted where fires had raged, and moss softened the sharp edges of ruin. From the woods came a faint chorus of sounds, not quite birds, not quite beasts, a harmony built from something older. Anyone listening long enough would swear the rhythm matched the heartbeat of the land itself. At the edge of that ruin stood a girl no older than 16. Her hair was pale, her eyes amber-green, catching light like an animal's. She held a weathered camera, Rose's old Nikon, its strap mended with twine. The girl's name was Clara, though no one in town ever asked her where she'd come from. She'd appeared one day after a storm, quiet and barefoot, staying with a foster couple near the old mill. They said she was a strange, polite child who wandered off most mornings toward the mountains. She was here again now, where the road ended and the world seemed to remember itself. Clara lifted the camera and took a picture of the valley below. The shutter snapped like a heartbeat. When she lowered it, a shape moved in the fog. At first, she thought it a deer, but the way it stepped through the mist, deliberate and upright, told her otherwise. Its antlers glimmered like polished bone. Its eyes held a deep, knowing calm. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing, halfway between shadow and sun. Clara didn't move. Neither did it. Something in her chest recognized that presence. A pull, quiet and familiar, like a memory that wasn't hers. "You came back," she whispered. Old Buck tilted his head, and for an instant she could almost hear words behind that gaze. Not sound, but meaning. The air seemed to tremble. Behind him, smaller shapes emerged, lithe, careful, watching her from the mist. The watchers, still alive, still waiting. Clara stepped forward, slowly, her boots sinking into soft earth. She raised a hand in silent greeting, as though answering an invitation that had traveled years to find her. The creatures didn't retreat. One of them, a smaller figure with russet feathers woven through fur, took a hesitant step toward her. Its movement stirred something deep in Clara's memory. A story she'd once overheard from her foster mother. They say the Harlow sisters saw angels in the barn before it burned. Maybe angels was the wrong word. Maybe they were what came after angels stopped listening. She dropped to her knees, brushing her fingers against the soil. There, beneath the moss, she found a fragment of scorched metal, part of Etta May's old project tag, the letters Genesis still faintly visible. She pocketed it without knowing why, feeling its warmth linger against her palm. When she looked up, Old Buck was gone. Only mist remained, and the faint impression of hoofprints leading deeper into the woods. That night, Clara developed her photographs in the tiny bathroom she'd turned into a dark room. As the first image surfaced, she caught her breath. In the photograph, where she should have stood alone, a tall, antlered silhouette loomed faintly behind her, watching. The next morning, Sheriff Dale Tucker, older now, his badge dulled by years of quiet, found her prints hanging on the line when he came to check on her. He studied them a long while before saying, "Your eyes? You got that same look your Aunt Rose used to have." "My aunt?" Clara frowned. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, you look just like her when she first came down from that mountain." Clara smiled faintly, though she didn't answer. Some truths didn't need saying. She packed her camera, thanked the sheriff, and set off toward the hollow again, following a trail only she could see. By dusk, the forest swallowed her whole. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying the scent of damp earth and something electric, alive. Clara walked until the fog thickened around her, the way it had around Rose years ago, when she'd first met the creatures her grandmother had made. Only this time the hollow didn't whisper warnings. It welcomed her. In the distance, a pale light shimmered among the trees, not the cold glow of machinery, but something organic. It pulsed softly like breath or heartbeat. Clara stepped closer. The ground beneath her boots began to hum, faint vibrations rippling through the soil. She knelt, pressing her hand to the moss. Warm, alive. The hollow wasn't just surviving, it was growing. Through the trees, she saw movement, a dozen maybe. More hybrid forms weaving through the mist, not hiding, not afraid. One paused at the edge of the clearing and turned toward her, its face almost human, its eyes gentle but knowing. And there, for the briefest moment, she felt two presences, Maggie's steadiness, Rose's wonder, echoing through her blood like an inheritance. They had left her this, a legacy that breathed. Clara raised her camera again, but this time she didn't take a picture. She simply watched, the way her aunt once had, as the mountain reclaimed its secrets. By the time dawn broke, the hollow was silent again. The mist began to lift, and only the faintest tracks marked where Clara had gone. No one saw her return, but sometimes, on fog-heavy mornings, the locals swore they heard footsteps on the old farmhouse porch and the creak of a door that hadn't opened in years. And in the woods, where the light bent strangely through the trees, a quiet watcher stood, antlers like branches, eyes like memory, guarding what remained of Etta May's dream. Not monsters, not miracles, just what the mountain kept. The sun climbed slowly over the ridgeline, spilling gold through the pines. Mist burned away in ribbons, revealing the valley as it had always been, wild, secret, eternal. The farmhouse below looked smaller now, half swallowed by ivy and time. A single window pane glimmered as though catching some invisible movement inside. Clara stood on the rise above it, camera slung against her hip, eyes fixed on the mountains beyond. She could feel the hum again, deep in her bones now, not just the earth's pulse but her own answering it. Each heartbeat echoed the same rhythm she'd heard in the forest, a reminder that she was part of something that had never really ended. She thought of Maggie, who'd once tried to reason the world into sense, of Rose, who'd tried to love it back to balance, of Etta May, who had believed creation itself was an act of faith. Their lives had wound together like roots beneath this soil. Whatever they'd awakened had not been lost. It had changed, adapted, become part of the hollow's breath. Clara crouched and placed a small carved figure on the ground, a wooden deer with feathered wings, its surface worn smooth from her pocket. "For all of you," she murmured, "for what you gave back." Then she rose, brushing dirt from her hands, and started down the slope toward the stream. Behind her, the air shifted. Leaves rustled though no wind stirred them. A low, melodic sound drifted through the trees, a tone between prayer and heartbeat. She turned just once. At the edge of the tree line, old Buck stood again, bathed in morning light. The scars along his flank had faded to silver. His eyes glowed with calm recognition. Around him gathered smaller shapes, silent and unafraid. He lowered his head, a gesture of greeting or benediction, and Clara nodded in return. "I'll keep your secret," she said softly, "same as they did." The creatures melted back into the green, and the hollow resumed its stillness. Only birdsong remained, ordinary and bright. Clara kept walking until the path joined the road, the old Harlow road that led to town and beyond. She didn't look back this time. The valley would remember her without witness. By the time the sun reached its height, mist had fully lifted. The burned barn's ruins shimmered faintly in the heat, and somewhere beneath the soil, a seed split open, roots curling downward. In another season, a new growth would rise there, its leaves veined with iridescent color, unlike any plant catalogued before. The watchers would tend it, silent stewards of Etta May's legacy, proof that creation never dies, it only changes its shape. And when the next traveller came wandering through the Smokies, drawn by whispers of strange songs in the fog, they would feel it too, the quiet awareness, the sense of eyes upon them, not hostile but ancient. The mountain would hold its breath, listening, deciding, and then, as always, the hollow would keep its secrets. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Maggie turned. They speak? Not like us. Through the ground, the air, the water. They don't use words, they use presence, emotion. They've been waiting for you. Me. Rose smiled faintly. You still carry her blood. They want you to see what she saw. Before Maggie could answer, the lights flickered. The hum beneath the floorboards deepened, vibrating through the walls. Rose reached for her hand. Don't be afraid. The room dissolved around them. For a heartbeat or an eternity, Maggie saw everything. The hollow before the house, lush and green, untouched by roads. Etta May walking through tall grass with old Buck beside her, not as a creature but as a man, half wild, half divine. The experiments, the failures, the moment creation and compassion became the same act. And then, the fire, the fear, the cover-up, the beginning of the end. When the vision faded, Maggie gasped for air, tears streaking her face. She didn't mean to make monsters. No, Rose said. She meant to mend what was already broken. Outside, the watchers stepped closer, their eyes like lanterns in the fog. The smallest one, a child-sized silhouette, held out its hand. Maggie hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The door swung open on its own, the air outside charged with warmth instead of chill. When her fingers brushed the creatures, she felt a pulse, life raw and unfiltered, like the earth breathing through her skin. Images flooded her mind, roots threading through stone, rivers flowing backward, forests reclaiming towns. A balance being rewritten. They're not here to replace us, Rose said behind her. They're here to remind us what we forgot. Maggie turned to her sister, light flickering across both their faces. And what's that? Rose smiled, a mix of sorrow and awe. That life doesn't end. It adapts. The creatures began to fade into the mist again, their shapes dissolving like smoke. Only the hum remained, softer now, like a lullaby sung by the land itself. Maggie looked at Rose. Will you stay with them? For a while, Rose said. They still need a bridge. Someone to help them understand what they were born from. And me? Rose's hand found hers, squeezing gently. You'll carry the story. That's your part, Maggie nodded. There were no more words left that could hold what she felt. Grief, wonder, guilt, and something close to peace. When dawn came, the valley was golden with fog. Maggie stood alone on the porch, suitcase in hand. She looked back once, toward the trees where Rose and the watchers had vanished, then down the road that led out of Harlow Hollow. The hum was still there, faint and steady beneath her feet. A reminder, a heartbeat. She smiled through her tears. Goodbye, Rose, she whispered. Goodbye, Grandma. The wind carried her words into the woods, and for just a moment, so brief she almost doubted it, Maggie heard an answer, a chorus of voices, low and beautiful, echoing through the valley like the earth itself was singing her home. The hollow slept for nearly 2 decades. Seasons rose and fell over its ridges like breath, winters soft as ash, summers thick with green and silence. The farmhouse aged in peace, half swallowed by vines and wildflowers, its bones still strong under layers of moss and memory. Maggie never came back, not at first. She built a life outside those mountains, far from the whispers of fog and the hum beneath her feet. She married once, briefly, then left again, drawn to quiet places and archives, to fragments of stories that sounded too much like her own. Her hair turned grey early, but her eyes stayed sharp, watchful. She wrote letters to Rose every spring, though she never knew where to send them. Then, one autumn morning, 21 years after the night of the Watchers, Maggie woke from a dream of her grandmother's voice. Just 3 words, soft as wind. "It's time, child." By dusk, she was driving toward Harlow Hollow again. The old signs were gone now. The road was narrower, the forest thicker. When she crested the ridge, she felt the hum again, faint beneath the wheels, like a heart beating deep within the earth. The valley was beautiful, wilder than she remembered. The air shimmered with gold dust, and vines wound around the bones of the old barn, weaving through rusted metal and forgotten tools. Maggie parked the truck and stepped out. The wind smelled of pine and wet stone. As she walked toward the house, she noticed movement near the tree line, not shadows this time, but shapes. Small ones. They watched her silently, curious, not afraid. Their eyes glowed softly in the dimming light, not alien but familiar. Children. She knelt slowly. One of them, a girl no older than 10, stepped forward, her skin pale as birch bark, her gaze bright and steady. Maggie saw it instantly. The human softness in her expression, the faint trace of Rose's features around her eyes. Maggie's heart tightened. "You're hers, aren't you?" she whispered. The girl tilted her head, listening, then smiled. "She said you'd come back." Maggie's breath caught. "Rose, she's alive." The child nodded. "She lives where the roots meet the river. She helps us grow." Tears blurred Maggie's vision. "Can you take me to her?" The girl reached out her hand. Maggie hesitated, then took it. Her skin was warm, pulsing with faint energy, a rhythm older than blood shared between them. They walked through the forest as the sun set. The path glowed faintly beneath their feet, threads of bioluminescent moss marking the way. The air was thick with sound, soft, layered harmonies, part wind, part song, and then Maggie saw it. The river bend had transformed into something like a sanctuary. Trees arched overhead, their trunks hollowed into living cathedrals of light. Water glimmered with blue and gold veins that pulsed gently, as if alive, and there, standing beside the water, was Rose. She hadn't aged. Not exactly. Her face was calm, luminous, her hair streaked with white that shimmered like silver thread. Her eyes still held that same golden fleck, but they seemed deeper now, full of peace. "Maggie," Rose said softly. "You made it." Maggie couldn't speak at first. She crossed the clearing and took her sister's hands. "You're real," she whispered. "All this time." "I've been here," Rose said. "With them. With her." "Her." Rose smiled. "The Hollow. It's alive now, fully." Grandma's work finally completed itself. The Watchers became part of everything. The trees, the soil, the air. Even us, Maggie looked around, realizing what she was seeing. Every plant, every glimmer, pulsed in rhythm with the same heartbeat she'd felt beneath her feet since she was a child. The land wasn't just healing. It was becoming. Rose squeezed her hand. "You see it, don't you? This is what Etta May wanted. Not to replace life, to unify it." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "And what about you? What are you now?" Rose smiled faintly. "Human enough to remember. Different enough to stay." They stood in silence for a long time, the air filled with the soft murmur of water and the distant laughter of the children. When Rose finally spoke again, her voice was low and certain. "They'll come again one day, the ones from outside. Scientists, soldiers, maybe even dreamers. They'll see this place as a mystery, a threat, a miracle. You'll have to decide what to tell them." Maggie looked at her sister, at the harmony of something ancient and new standing in human form, and shook her head. "No, I won't tell them anything. Let the Hollow speak for itself." Rose smiled. "That's what I hoped you'd say." A light breeze stirred the trees. For a moment, Maggie thought she heard Etta May's voice again, layered in the wind like a blessing. "Preserve life, my girls. All of it." Maggie closed her eyes and breathed it in, the scent of moss, earth, and rebirth. When she opened them again, the sky had deepened to indigo, the stars winking through like seeds of light. Rose stepped back toward the water. "You'll come again?" "Always," Maggie said. "As long as the Hollow remembers me," Rose nodded. "It will." That night Rose returned. Maggie found her at the edge of the old field, kneeling in the frost, camera in hand. The moonlight touched her hair with silver, and for a heartbeat she looked like Etta May, calm, resolute. "And somewhere else entirely. Thought you'd gone for good," Maggie said softly. Rose smiled faintly. I had to see them again. Maggie knelt beside her, following her gaze toward the tree line. You saw them? Rose nodded. They're different now. More organized. Like a family. Old Buck's still alive. I think he's their leader. Maggie's heart ached at the name. You talked to him? Not with words, Rose said. He showed me things, memories. She glanced at her sister. Etta May didn't make monsters, Maggie. She made survivors. She gave them a chance to keep what the world threw away, and in the process she nearly destroyed us, Maggie said. Rose lowered her eyes. Maybe that's the price for playing God. They sat in silence. The forest ahead of them shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere beyond the trees a soft howl rose, long and low, echoing through the hollow. Maggie shivered, but it wasn't fear this time. It was recognition. Rose lifted her camera and took a single photo. The flash burst like lightning, illuminating eyes, dozens of them, watching from the dark. When the light faded, the eyes were gone. They're keeping watch, Rose whispered. Guarding this place. Maggie exhaled slowly. Guarding us or guarding themselves? Rose's answer was quiet. Maybe both. A week later, the trucks came again, fewer this time, moving like scavengers through the wreckage of the barn. Maggie watched from the ridge, as men in hazmat suits collected soil samples and burned what they couldn't explain. Dr. Granger was gone. Her body never found, but the program lived on in secret whispers and sealed reports. That night, Maggie drove into town. She parked outside the sheriff's office and waited for Tucker to step out. When he did, she handed him a small USB drive. What's this? He asked. Granger's data, she said. Everything I could find on her laptop before it fried. If they come looking, tell them it's gone. He frowned. What about you? I'm leaving, Maggie said. For now, Tucker nodded slowly. You think you'll come back? She looked toward the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. You don't really leave this place, Sheriff? Not if it's in your blood, he understood. He always had. The next morning, fog blanketed the hollow again. Rose stood at the edge of the property, camera slung over her shoulder, eyes fixed on the tree line. She'd taken to writing letters she never sent, to Maggie, to Etta May, sometimes even to the creatures. She spoke them softly as she wrote, her breath visible in the cold. Dear Maggie, you were right to leave. The world beyond these hills still makes sense, even if this one never will. But I can't go. I belong here. They trust me now. Sometimes when the fog is thickest, I see them moving, tall, graceful, like shadows made of memory. Old Buck limps a little less every day. I think they're rebuilding. I think Grandma would have been proud. She folded the letter, tucking it beneath a smooth stone near the porch, the same way Etta May used to leave notes for the girls when they were young. As she turned back toward the house, movement caught her eye. Deep in the pines, a smaller figure stood watching. Its eyes were bright, golden, intelligent, and unmistakably human. The creature stepped forward once, curiously, before vanishing into the fog. Rose stood motionless, heart hammering. Then she smiled. They're growing, she whispered. They're changing. Behind her the hollow exhaled, wind stirring through the trees like a sigh, and somewhere in the stillness, faint and almost human, came the sound of laughter. Autumn came early to the hollow that year. The leaves turned fast, rust, crimson, and ochre spilling down the slopes like fire. The air had a listening quality to it, as if the valley itself were holding on to every sound, every whisper of wind and wing. Maggie drove back into Harlow Hollow just before dusk. She hadn't meant to return. She'd promised herself she wouldn't, but promises had never held much weight here. The mountains remembered more than words ever could. The road was overgrown, half swallowed by moss and creeping ivy. When she reached the farmhouse, her breath caught. It looked older, almost reclaimed, porch sagging, windows glazed with grime. But there was light inside. She stepped out of the truck and listened. Somewhere beyond the barn ruins, something moved, steady, rhythmic, not threatening but deliberate. A hum, deep and organic, pulsed through the ground like a heartbeat. Rose. The door opened before she could knock. Her sister stood there, barefoot, wearing Etta May's old shawl. Her eyes, still flecked with gold, seemed older somehow. not tired but timeless. "Maggie," Rose said softly, "you came back. I had to. The papers said the valley's closed off again. Another incident. They won't say what," Rose nodded. "They're afraid." "Of what?" Maggie's voice trembled. "Of them." "Of change," Rose answered. She led Maggie inside. The air was warm, filled with the faint scent of earth and pine resin. The living room was lined with jars, specimens, sketches, seed pods, feathers and bones. Not grotesque, but sacred somehow, like a shrine to all that the world had refused to see. "They're evolving faster than anyone expected," Rose said, moving to the window. Etame's code didn't just rewrite their biology, it rewrote their relationship with this place. "They're part of the ecosystem now." "They heal it?" Maggie frowned. "You sound like her." "Maybe I am her," Rose murmured. In a way, outside, something shimmered among the trees. Maggie moved closer to the window and froze. Figures, half a dozen, maybe more, stood at the forest's edge. Not hiding, watching. Their outlines seemed to ripple with the mist, neither wholly human nor animal. "The Watchers," Rose said quietly. "That's what they call themselves." Rose shook her head. "They're not mistakes, they're what's left. You saw it too, they're learning. They're becoming something else. Something better." "Better?" Maggie's voice cracked. "You think killing people is better?" "They're defending themselves." "They're monsters, Rose." "No," Rose said softly, her voice trembling. "They're mirrors." The words hung between them like smoke. That night, Granger's men spread out through the forest, carrying rifles fitted with tranquilizer darts. The air was sharp with the scent of ozone from their floodlights. Maggie watched from the upstairs window as beams of light sliced across the trees, searching. Beside her, Rose was packing a bag, flashlights, camera, food. "What the hell are you doing?" Maggie hissed. "I'm going to warn them." "Rose, if you go out there, they'll kill them all, Maggie. You know they will. They'll call it containment, and then they'll burn this whole valley to the ground." Maggie's throat tightened. "And if they kill you?" Rose paused, looking at her sister. "Then I'll die doing what Grandma started, protecting life. You can't undo what she did, Maggie, but maybe we can do it right." Before Maggie could stop her, Rose slipped out the back door into the mist. The forest was alive with motion, shadows flickering between trees, the hum of machines above. Rose moved silently through the underbrush, guided by instinct more than direction. Her heart pounded with fear and something like faith. When she reached the creek at the edge of the property, she saw them, silhouettes gathering in the moonlight. Dozens of hybrids, their forms glimmering with the strange mix of fur, feathers and scales. Eyes glowed softly in the dark, blue, amber, gold. They looked at her not as prey or intruder, but as something else. Old Buck stood among them, his wounds bound with leaves and mud. He watched her with that same measured intensity. "They're here," Rose whispered. "They're coming for you." Old Buck tilted his head, then stepped closer, lowering his muzzle until it nearly touched her hand. A pulse of warmth spread through her palm, like an electric current. For an instant, she saw images, memories, not her own. Etame in the barn, younger, smiling sadly. The first light of creation. Then pain, fire, loss. When she opened her eyes, she was crying. "We'll protect you," she whispered. "I promise." Behind her, a branch snapped. Voices, flashlights. "Over here," someone shouted. The hybrids shifted restlessly. Old Buck raised his head, rumbling deep in his chest. Rose turned, heart racing. "Maggie!" Her sister burst through the underbrush, gun in hand, not to fire, but to warn. "They've got gas canisters," she gasped. "They're going to smoke them out." Granger's team appeared moments later, advancing in formation. Granger herself followed behind, calm as ever, her tablet glowing with signals from her drones. "Dr. Granger," Maggie said, stepping in front of Rose, "stop this, they're sentient." Granger smiled. "So are rats in the right conditions." Rose moved beside Maggie. "You don't understand. They can feel. They remember." Granger's gaze softened with mock pity. "Oh, I understand perfectly. Etta May succeeded. That's why we have to take control before they multiply, before they replace us." Old Buck's low growl vibrated through the clearing. The hybrids began to form a circle, shielding the younger ones. Granger's soldiers raised their rifles. "Don't!" Maggie shouted, but it was too late. One dart fired, then another. The forest exploded into chaos. Screams, roars, flashes of light. The hybrids lunged, silent and swift, their movements eerily coordinated. Soldiers fell, floodlights shattered. The air filled with the stench of smoke and fear. Maggie grabbed Rose's arm, dragging her toward cover, but Rose fought her. "They're defending themselves. They're killing them." Old Buck turned toward Granger, his massive form illuminated in a beam of light. For a heartbeat, the two of them, the creation and the creator's heir, faced each other. Then Old Buck leapt. The impact threw Granger backward. Her scream was swallowed by the forest. Maggie pulled Rose away, stumbling through mud and roots until they reached the farmhouse clearing. Behind them, the woods burned again. But this time the flames moved as if alive, spreading along the tree line in rhythmic bursts like breathing. They collapsed on the porch, shaking. Rose looked back at the glow of the woods. "He saved us," she whispered. Maggie stared into the firelight, her voice hollow. "No, Rose, he saved what's left of her work." By dawn, the forest was silent again. Smoke rose in thin columns from the ridge. Granger's vehicles were gone, or destroyed. Tucker arrived just after sunrise, exhausted and grim. "Whatever was out there," he said, "it's gone deeper into the mountains. Your land's been declared off-limits. Military's moving in." Rose looked at him with tears streaking her soot-stained face. "They'll hunt them, won't they?" Tucker hesitated. "That's not my call anymore." When he left, Maggie stood beside her sister, staring at the smoking hills. Rose touched her arm. "We can still find them. Help them." Maggie didn't answer. Her gaze drifted toward the trees, where faint movement shimmered between the branches. For an instant she thought she saw eyes, calm, watching, waiting. "They don't need our help anymore," Maggie said softly. "They're learning how to survive without us." The mist thickened as the morning sun struggled to break through. Somewhere beyond sight, in the deep hollows of the mountains, the hybrids moved, gathering, rebuilding, awakening. And in the quiet that followed, the Harlow sisters understood that what their grandmother had started was no longer hers to control, or theirs to end. It belonged to the mountains now. It always had. The valley was quiet again, too quiet. 3 weeks had passed since the night of fire and blood, yet the air still carried the scent of ash and something older, like rain on iron or the memory of something wild. The government men came and went in black trucks with tinted windows, fencing off the Harlow land and posting warning signs that read, "Environmental Hazard Zone." But everyone in town knew better. They whispered. They always had. Maggie Harlow stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching fog roll down from the ridge. The boards beneath her boots were still scorched from the night the barn burned, though the house itself had somehow survived. She'd been cleaning it in silence for days, as if order might somehow undo what chaos had made. The hollow was changing. The birds didn't sing anymore. The deer had stopped crossing the meadow. Even the air seemed thicker, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Behind her, a screen door creaked. "You shouldn't still be here," Sheriff Tucker said, stepping onto the porch. His hat was pulled low, his voice heavy. "They'll come back to finish cleaning up, you know that." Maggie didn't turn. "I know. You could come stay in town a while, folks would understand." "I'm not leaving again," she said. "Not until it's done." He sighed. "Maggie, I've seen strange things in these hills, heard stories even my daddy wouldn't repeat. But whatever your grandma started, it's bigger than this place now." She looked out across the valley, where mist hung low like a shroud. That's what I'm afraid of. Tucker hesitated, then reached into his coat. He handed her a sealed manila envelope. Found this in the county records office. Thought you should see it before they bury it deeper. Maggie opened it. Inside was a government report stamped classified and dated 1963. Across the top, Project Preserve Genesis, status terminated. Her grandmother's name was listed under lead geneticist field operations, and below it, Lucille Granger's signature, co-signed as oversight director. Maggie traced her fingers over the ink, the connection between Etta May and Granger finally complete. She didn't just run from them, Maggie murmured. She finished what they wouldn't let her start. Tucker adjusted his hat. You think those things out there, her creations, they're still alive? Maggie's jaw tightened. I think they're evolving. The hybrids began to move, first one, then many, disappearing into the woods. Old Buck lingered last, his gaze fixed on Rose. She stepped closer. Where will you go? He made that sound again, the one Maggie could almost understand. A word without language. Home. Then he turned, antlers glinting in the firelight, and was gone. Maggie and Rose stood alone in the smoke, the heat washing over them. Rose's face glowed with reflected flame. He's right. It's over. Maggie shook her head. No, Granger's people will come back. The government. Someone will. They won't stop until they find them. Rose looked toward the forest. Then we'll have to stop them first. By dawn, the valley smelled of ash and wet earth. The last of the fire had died, leaving the barn a skeleton of charred wood. Maggie and Rose sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, neither speaking for a long time. Finally, Maggie broke the silence. When Grandma said she wanted to preserve creation, I thought she meant animals, extinct species. But this was something else, Rose nodded slowly. She wanted to make sure something survived us. Maggie turned that over in her mind. The night's events already felt distant, like a fever dream. But the evidence was there. The blood on her hands, the tracks in the mud, the faint hum that still vibrated through the air. A movement caught her eye at the edge of the woods, a shadow slipping between the trees. Do you think they'll come back? She asked. Rose smiled faintly. They never left. Maggie followed her gaze. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw faces in the mist, dozens of them, watching silently. Then they were gone. The sound of tires approached again, this time slower, cautious. Sheriff Dale Tucker's truck rolled into view. He stepped out, hat in hand, eyes scanning the wreckage. What in God's name happened here? He muttered. Maggie didn't answer. Tucker took a long look at the ruins, the spent casings glinting in the dirt. You girls all right? Define all right, Rose said softly. He rubbed a hand across his face. I got calls about gunfire last night. Whole town's talking. You want to tell me what I'm supposed to write in my report? Maggie met his eyes. Write that the fire took the barn. He studied her a moment, then nodded slowly. And the people who started it? They're gone, she said. He hesitated, looking toward the woods. And the things that were in there? Rose's gaze followed his. They're gone too. But even as she said it, Maggie knew it was a lie. The forest wasn't empty. It was awake, Tucker sighed. All right then. Guess some stories are better left buried. He tipped his hat and headed back to his truck. When he was gone, Rose looked at her sister. You think he believes us? No, Maggie said. But he'll pretend to. The sisters sat in silence again, listening to the wind moving through the hollow. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, but charged, as if every leaf carried a secret. Finally, Rose whispered, They're not monsters, Maggie. Maggie looked at her, eyes tired. I know, but that doesn't mean the world will see it that way. Rose nodded. Then we keep their secret, like Grandma did. Maggie stared out at the hills, the mist curling like smoke. For how long? For as long as it takes, Rose said. Until they're safe. Until we are. Somewhere deep in the forest, a sound rose, a single low call that echoed across the valley. Not a growl, not a howl. Something in between. The sisters listened until it faded. Maggie whispered, It's not over, is it? Rose smiled sadly. It never is. The night after the fire, the sky over Harlow Hollow bled with smoke and cloud. The barn was gone, a blackened skeleton against the pale moon, and the sisters sat in silence on the farmhouse porch, staring toward the forest that had swallowed their grandmother's legacy whole. Somewhere in the distance something cried out, not quite animal, not quite human. Rose shivered. "They're still out there," she whispered. Maggie didn't answer. She sat with her elbows on her knees, the flicker of dying flames reflected in her tired eyes. Her hands were cut and blackened from dragging debris away from the barn earlier, her mind raw from what she'd seen. Blood on the ground, shapes in the dark that shouldn't exist. The memory of old Buck lunging at one of Granger's men still throbbed behind her eyes. "They're not gone," Rose said again. "They're hiding. They're scared." Maggie turned, voice brittle. "Scared? Rose, those things killed a man tonight." Rose flinched, her lower lip trembling. "He shot first. That doesn't make them safe," Maggie said sharply. "It makes them dangerous. And it makes us next if they decide we're part of the problem." The silence between them grew heavy. From the field came the sound of snapping branches, followed by a low, almost mournful rumble. Maggie tensed. Rose rose from her chair, stepping toward the porch rail. The air was colder now, thick with mist creeping out of the trees. "Maggie," she breathed. "Look." Between the tree trunks something moved, large, slow, deliberate. It limped into the moonlight, and Maggie saw it was old Buck. His flank was torn, matted with blood, his antlers cracked. But his eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes, still burned with an eerie light. He stopped at the edge of the yard. The sisters froze. Then in the dirt before him, old Buck lowered his head and began to drag one of his antlers through the soil. Shapes formed, rough, uncertain, but unmistakable. A spiral, a line, a circle enclosing a smaller mark. Rose's breath caught. He's trying to talk." Maggie swallowed hard. Her scientific instincts screamed to observe, to document, to make sense of it. But there was no rational language for what she was witnessing. "Rose," she whispered, "get inside." But Rose stepped forward instead, down the porch steps, barefoot in the damp grass. "It's okay," she said softly. "He knows me." Old Buck raised his head. His chest heaved as he limped closer. Maggie stood halfway between fear and disbelief, unable to move. The hybrid's breath came out in visible bursts of heat, his voice a deep resonance that vibrated through the night air. Not words, but something close. A sound that carried emotion, grief, warning, and something almost like recognition. "He's saying they're coming," Rose murmured. "Who?" Maggie asked. Rose's eyes widened, as if listening to a language only she could hear. "The others. The rest of them. They're gathering in the woods." Before Maggie could respond, a distant rumble echoed down the valley, the whine of engines, mechanical, unnatural against the living silence of the mountains. Headlights cut through the trees from the far ridge. "Granger," Maggie hissed. Old Buck turned sharply toward the sound, his muscles tensing. Then he looked back at Rose, and for a moment, Maggie could swear something like understanding passed between them, a mutual plea, protect, hide, survive. Without warning, he vanished back into the dark. By morning, the valley was crawling with vehicles, trucks with black tarps, drones hovering above the tree line, men in tactical gear moving with quiet precision. Sheriff Tucker stood at the property line, jaw tight, hands on his hips as Dr. Lucille Granger climbed out of a black SUV. "Dr. Granger," he called. "I thought we agreed you'd clear out after last night." She smiled thinly. "I don't take orders from small-town lawmen, Sheriff. There's federal jurisdiction in effect now." "Quarantine zone," Tucker spat on the ground. "Quarantine my ass?" "You're hunting them." Granger's cold gaze flicked toward the burnt barn. "Containment, Sheriff. For public safety." Maggie and Rose stood on the porch, watching the exchange from a distance. Rose's fists were clenched. Maggie's voice was low. "She won't stop until she finds them." "Then we can't let her," Rose said. Maggie turned toward her, startled by the conviction in her sister's voice. Rose looked pale but fierce, her eyes shining with the same quiet defiance that Etta May must have once carried. "They're alive because she couldn't stop playing God," Maggie said. And now we're supposed to protect her mistakes. Figures surged from the tree line, fast, silent, impossible. Shapes half seen in the dark, moving on all fours and twos alike. Screams followed, short and brutal. Gunfire cracked, then cut off mid-burst. Maggie froze. The hybrids, the creations, were defending themselves. Something massive moved at the edge of the fog. Old Buck, his antlers glowed faintly under the moonlight, streaked with silver veins that pulsed like living metal. He turned his head, eyes catching hers, and in that glance, Maggie felt both warning and recognition. He wasn't hunting her. He was protecting something. Then, from the dark behind him, a smaller shape stepped forward. Rose. Maggie's breath hitched. Her sister was alive, but changed. Her movements were fluid, unnaturally graceful, her skin pale as frost. She looked at Maggie and smiled faintly. Before Maggie could call out, Granger's voice rang from the distance. "Tranquilize them, both of them." A dart hissed through the air and struck Rose in the shoulder. Old Buck let out a sound that split the night, a guttural, mournful roar that vibrated through the ground. The forest answered. Every tree, every shadow seemed to shudder alive. And in the chaos that followed, the flash of muzzle fire, the screams, the shriek of something ancient and vengeful, Maggie realized the mountain itself was no longer sleeping. It was waking, and whatever May had made was not finished being born. The gunfire had stopped, but the echoes still rolled down the valley like distant thunder. Smoke and fog hung low over the clearing, mixing into a metallic haze that stung Maggie's throat. She pressed her back against the porch beam, shotgun clutched tight, eyes locked on the tree line. Somewhere in the dark, someone was moaning. Then silence again. The world held its breath. Maggie forced herself upright. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, but she needed to find Rose. She stepped off the porch into the wet grass, heart pounding against her ribs like a hammer. The moon hung behind clouds, a faint white coin, barely lighting the wreckage. The first body she found was one of Granger's men. His tactical gear was torn open, his face pale in the mist. No blood, just an expression of shock frozen in death, as if he'd seen something too vast to understand. Something rustled in the brush nearby. "Rose?" Maggie whispered. A shape stepped forward, not her sister, but something taller, broader. For a heartbeat it looked like a man, until the light caught its features. Antlers branching like a crown, shoulders corded with muscle, skin patterned with the faint shimmer of scales. Old Buck. He moved slowly, not threatening. His great head dipped slightly as if in recognition. Maggie lowered the gun. "Where is she?" she asked. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he turned his head toward the woods and let out a low, mournful sound, a tone that seemed to vibrate in her bones. Then he stepped aside. From behind him, a smaller figure appeared, Rose. Her skin was pale and luminous, her clothes torn and streaked with mud. Her hair clung to her face, and her eyes, those unnatural gold-flecked eyes, glowed faintly in the darkness. "Maggie," she whispered. "You shouldn't have stayed." Maggie ran to her, pulling her into an embrace. Rose was warm, too warm like fever. "You need help. You're hurt?" "No," Rose shook her head. "I'm not. Not like before." Maggie searched her sister's face, heart breaking. "What did they do to you?" Rose smiled faintly, her expression sad and serene. "Not them. Grandma, she made them part of us. She made me part of them." Maggie stepped back. "That's not possible." "It is," came another voice from the fog. "You, of all people, should understand that, Doctor." Lucille Granger emerged from the trees, her white coat streaked with dirt, pistol steady in her hand. Her glasses were gone, her hair wild from the chaos. Behind her, two of her surviving men followed, their faces pale, darting eyes scanning the trees. "Don't move," Granger commanded. "Hands where I can see them." Old Buck shifted his weight, a low growl rumbling from deep within his chest. Granger smirked. "Fascinating. It defends you." Rose stepped forward. "They're not your test subjects. They're everyone's test subjects," Granger snapped. "Do you even understand what you are? Your grandmother rewrote the boundaries of life. She succeeded where the rest of us failed. And now you, She gestured at Rose. "You're proof it works." Maggie positioned herself between Rose and the gun. "She's not proof. She's my sister." Granger's voice softened, turning persuasive. "And that's exactly why you'll help me. Think rationally, Maggie. Your grandmother created a hybrid species. The military buried it because they feared what it meant for control. But you and I, we could finish her work properly, safely. We could own it." Maggie's jaw tightened. "You think this is about ownership?" Granger took a step closer, lowering the pistol slightly. "You're a scientist. You know what a discovery like this means. Cures for disease, evolution itself, guided by human hands. We can end extinction." Rose's voice cut through the fog like a blade. "You mean sell it?" Granger turned on her. "Don't moralize something you don't understand, child. You've become an anomaly, part of an unauthorized genome. You belong in containment." The word containment hit Maggie like ice water. She remembered the files, the names of missing people Etta May had used as donors. Containment was just another word for disposal. Old Buck took a step forward. The air seemed to vibrate with his presence. His eyes locked on Granger. She raised her pistol again. "Stay back!" But Maggie saw it, his restraint. The creatures weren't attacking. They were protecting. "They're intelligent," Maggie said quietly. "They understand what you're saying." Granger didn't look away. "Then they'll understand that they've reached the end of their usefulness." She fired. The shot cracked like lightning. Rose screamed. The bullet hit Old Buck in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He stumbled, caught himself, and roared, a deep animal sound that made the earth tremble. The woods came alive. Shapes poured from the trees. Shadows made flesh, eyes glinting like wet stone. They moved with fluid, terrible grace. Granger's men fired blindly. One fell instantly, dragged screaming into the dark. "Fall back." Granger shouted, but it was too late. Old Buck charged, his antlers slamming into the second soldier and tossing him like a rag doll. The man hit a tree with a sickening crack. Granger turned to flee. "Stop!" Maggie cried. Granger spun, gun raised. "You think they'll spare you? You're next." She aimed at Rose. Maggie didn't think. She lunged forward, slamming into Granger's arm. The gun fired again, the shot going wide. They struggled, stumbling through the mud, the weapons skidding away. "Your grandmother was a monster," Granger hissed. She thought she was saving the world, but she was just building gods who'd forget their maker. Maggie's fist connected with her jaw. "Maybe that's the point." They both froze as another sound filled the clearing, a low, rhythmic chant, almost like speech. Rose was on her knees beside Old Buck, pressing her hand to his wound. A faint golden light spread beneath her palm, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Maggie stared in disbelief. "Rose, what are you doing?" Rose didn't look up. "What Grandma started healing." Old Buck's breathing steadied. The light faded. He lifted his head and looked at her, at both of them, with something like sorrow. Then he spoke, not in English, but the meaning was clear. The sound resonated through the air, through Maggie's bones, into her mind. No more fear, no more cages. Granger scrambled to her feet, backing away. This isn't possible." Maggie rose slowly. "Neither was Etta May's dream. But here we are." Old Buck took a step forward. Granger fired again, but this time the bullet stopped mid-air. It hung there, quivering, then fell harmlessly into the mud. The hybrids had surrounded them now, dozens of them, silent and watching. Feathers, fur, scales, skin, some more human, others barely so. Their eyes glowed faintly in the fog. Granger dropped the gun. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If the world finds out—" "The world already has," Maggie said softly. Old Buck stepped closer, his massive form towering over her. His hand, still bleeding, extended slowly toward Granger. "Not to harm, but to offer something." "A chance." Granger stared at it, trembling. Then she screamed and struck him across the face. The moment shattered, a blur of movement. One of the smaller hybrids leapt, pinning Granger to the ground. She thrashed, but the creature didn't kill her. It held her down, staring into her eyes, as if forcing her to see something. She began to sob. "Please, please don't." Maggie turned away, her stomach twisting. She didn't want to watch, but the sound that followed wasn't violence, it was silence. When she looked again, Granger lay motionless, breathing shallowly, eyes distant. The creature backed away, vanishing into the fog. Old Buck lowered his head. "It's over," Rose whispered, but Maggie knew it wasn't. The barn behind them was burning, slow, smouldering flames licking at the broken boards. One of the soldiers must have dropped a flare. Smoke rolled upward into the trees, curling like ghosts. The creature turned toward her, its voice like gravel and wind. "Preserve life." Then, almost tenderly, it reached toward Rose. She didn't move away. When its hand brushed her cheek, the blue light flared, blinding, searing, beautiful. Maggie screamed her sister's name. When the light faded, only mist remained, and in the distance the creature's cries echoed, mourning or triumph. Maggie could no longer tell. When Maggie woke, the world was grey again. The storm had passed, but the air felt scorched, heavy with something older than rain. The front door stood open, wind tugging the curtains like breath. She called for Rose. No answer. Only the soft hum from the woods, low and rhythmic like a heartbeat under the soil. Her hands shook as she grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The grass was flattened in strange, circular patterns, as though something large had moved through during the night. No footprints she could name, just deep impressions, the ground blackened around the edges. "Rose!" the forest answered with silence. Then a whisper, her name carried low on the wind. "Maggie." She turned toward the barn. The doors were open again, chains scattered like dead snakes. Inside, the light had changed. No longer the pulsing blue, but a softer golden glow. The machines were silent, lifeless, yet the air thrummed with energy, and there at the center of the floor was a shape. Rose. She lay curled on her side, pale but breathing. Her hair clung to her skin, streaked with something that shimmered faintly in the light. Maggie dropped beside her, shaking her shoulder. "Rose, wake up, please, wake up." Rose stirred, eyes fluttering open. But they weren't the same. The irises were flecked with gold, the pupils thin and sharp like an animal's. "Mags." Her voice was weak, distant. "I saw her," Maggie's breath caught. "Who?" "Grandma." She said, "It's my turn." Before Maggie could speak, a low sound rumbled through the barn, the same guttural tone as before. From the shadows, Old Buck stepped forward, slow and deliberate. But this time, he didn't look at Maggie. He looked at Rose. Rose didn't flinch. She rose unsteadily, bare feet silent on the dirt. Her gaze met his, and something passed between them. Something Maggie couldn't name. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot. Then Rose spoke, voice steady and strange. "They're not here to hurt us. They're here to begin again." "Rose, no." But her sister only smiled. "You can't stop what's already been born." Old Buck extended his hand, that hybrid, impossible hand, and Rose took it. Maggie backed away, heart pounding. "Rose, please!" Rose turned toward her one last time, eyes bright with unnatural light. "Tell them we're not monsters." Then the creatures began to move, not in chaos, but with purpose, slipping through the barn doors, vanishing into the trees one by one, silent as mist. Rose went with them, her figure fading into the fog until only her white gown remained visible. Maggie fell to her knees, sobbing. The light dimmed. The hum stopped, and then, just before the last echo faded, she heard her grandmother's voice, soft and clear in her mind. "Preserve life, Maggie, even when it frightens you." When dawn came, the valley was quiet, but in the distance where the fog met the trees, a new song began, wild, rising, full of sorrow and creation. 3 days after Rose disappeared into the woods with Old Buck, And the others, the valley, settled into a tense quiet that felt like holding one's breath. Maggie stayed in the farmhouse, curtains drawn, a rifle leaning against the wall. She didn't sleep much. The woods no longer sang at night. No insects, no owls, no wind. Just silence so deep it pressed against her eardrums. The only movement came at dawn, when fog crawled across the fields like something alive. By the fourth morning, the silence was broken by the crunch of tires on gravel. A black SUV rolled up the old dirt road, dust swirling in its wake. Maggie watched from the window as a woman stepped out, tall, silver-haired, dressed too clean for these mountains. She wore mirrored sunglasses and a faint smile, the kind people wear when they already know more than they should. The woman raised a hand in greeting. "Dr. Maggie Harlow?" Maggie stepped onto the porch but didn't answer right away. Her grip tightened on the porch railing. The woman approached, heels sinking into the mud. "My name is Dr. Lucille Granger. I'm here on behalf of Biodyne Industries, and unofficially an old friend of your grandmother's." Maggie's heart stopped for a moment. "Friend? I didn't know Etta May had many of those," Maggie said. "Oh, she didn't? Not really," Granger smiled thinly. "But she and I once worked together, back when her ideas were government property." She extended a card. Maggie didn't take it. "You were part of the Cold Creek Project," Maggie said quietly, remembering the photo she'd found. Granger's eyes flickered with faint amusement, so she kept the old records. "I wondered if she might." "What do you want?" "To help you," Granger replied smoothly, "and to make sure nothing dangerous remains on this property." Maggie gave a short laugh, a harsh, exhausted sound. "You're too late for that." Granger tilted her head. "I don't think so. I believe some of Etta May's creations are still here." That word, creations, made Maggie's skin crawl. Granger went on. "I can imagine how shocking it must have been to find them, but they're not what you think. They were part of an early-stage preservation experiment, one that should have been decommissioned decades ago. Your grandmother went rogue, continued without oversight. I'm here to collect what's left and ensure the safety of the community." Maggie crossed her arms. "Safety or containment?" Granger's smile didn't waver. "Those are often the same thing." Maggie turned toward the barn, the blackened ruins still smelling faintly of burnt oil and singed hay. "There's nothing left to contain." Granger's eyes followed her gaze. "That's interesting," she said softly, "because one of my reconnaissance drones detected heat signatures last night, roughly humanoid, but irregular, moving along the ridgeline." Maggie felt her pulse quicken. "You're flying drones over my land." "I'm monitoring an environmental hazard," Granger said, her tone clinical. "Let's not get lost in semantics." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Dr. Harlow, this isn't a fairy tale. Those things your grandmother made, they're engineered organisms, genetic anomalies. The longer they survive, the more unstable their biology becomes. You saw that, didn't you?" Maggie's throat tightened. She thought of Rose's eyes, gold and sharp and wrong. Granger pressed on. "We can neutralize them humanely, contain the spread, but I need your cooperation." "Containment?" Maggie's voice trembled now. "That's what you called it back then too, wasn't it, when you buried the truth?" Granger's expression hardened, the mask slipping. "Don't romanticize this, Dr. Harlow. Your grandmother was brilliant, but she broke every ethical boundary known to science. She tampered with human DNA. She merged it with non-human genomes. Do you understand what that means? Those creatures are not part of nature. They're not even part of evolution. They are an aberration." Maggie stared at her. "And yet you want them alive." Granger didn't deny it. "They could be instructive." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The mountain wind whispered between them, carrying the smell of rain and pine sap. Finally, Maggie said quietly, "You're not getting near that forest." Granger sighed as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Maggie, This is not negotiable. You've already been observed. You and your sister both. Maggie froze. Rose? She's alive, Granger said. For now. My people have seen her near the foothills, moving with one of the entities. She appears altered. I suggest we act quickly. Maggie took a step back. You stay the hell away from her. Granger's lips thinned. You're making a mistake. No, Maggie said. I'm keeping one from becoming permanent. Granger's phone buzzed. She answered briskly. Yes? Understood. She ended the call and gave Maggie a long, cool look. You might want to lock your doors tonight. Not because of them, she gestured toward the woods, but because some of my people aren't as patient as I am. Then she turned, heels crunching on gravel, and climbed back into the SUV. The vehicle rolled down the road and disappeared into the fog. That night the sound returned. It started as a low vibration in the walls, like a distant engine, but soon grew to a thrumming hum that made the windows rattle. Maggie stood by the window, shotgun in hand, staring into the dark. Then came the lights, faint blue orbs drifting through the trees, moving with deliberate rhythm. They weren't headlights. They weren't fireflies. A scream broke the night, not human, not fully. Maggie ran to the porch and saw flashlights moving beyond the fence, a team of men in tactical gear sweeping the property. She recognized Granger's insignia on their sleeves. Get a containment perimeter, one of them shouted, then the fog erupted. Maggie didn't answer. She turned the lock over, seeing a faint scorch mark along the broken edge. Not cut, burned, Rose's voice trembled. Something wanted out, Maggie straightened, jaw tightening. Something did get out. They spent the morning pretending to keep busy, Maggie stacking old boxes in the living room, Rose making tea she never drank. Every sound seemed amplified, the creak of the rafters, the tick of the clock, the distant cry of a crow. By noon, the fog had begun to thin. Maggie finally spoke. We're checking the barn. Rose looked up sharply. You said we wouldn't. I said we wouldn't at night. Daylight's different, Rose hesitated. And if we find something we can't explain? Maggie met her gaze. Then we do what Grandma didn't. We deal with it. The path to the barn was muddy from the rain, the earth soft under their boots. The air smelled of wet hay and rust. As they approached, the barn's outline emerged through the mist, slanted roof, faded red boards, the old weather vane hanging crooked. The doors were cracked open just enough for darkness to bleed through. Maggie's heart thudded as she pushed one door aside. It moaned on its hinges, revealing a space thick with the scent of animal musk, ozone, and something metallic, like blood and electricity. The first thing she noticed was the sound, faint, rhythmic breathing. Then came the light, blue, soft, pulsing. It emanated from a cluster of old machinery along the far wall, tangled wires, glass tanks and long-dead monitors flickering with weak life. The power that shouldn't exist hummed faintly in the floorboards. Jesus, Maggie whispered. Rose stepped closer, her breath fogging in the cold air. She built all this herself? There were cages, dozens of them, some open, others sealed. Inside, movement, small shapes shifting in the dim, eyes reflecting the light. Not one color, but many. Amber, green, gold. The sisters froze. From the nearest pen, something crawled forward into view. At first, Maggie thought it was a deer, slender limbs, fur glinting. But then she saw the hands. Not hooves, hands, fine-boned, jointed, gripping the straw. Its face was wrong too expressive, the eyes too human. Rose made a small sound, halfway between a gasp and a sob. Oh my God! The creature tilted its head, studying her. Maggie stumbled back, flashlight beam darting across the barn. More cages, more shapes, dozens. Some crouched in corners, others pressed against the bars, silent and unmoving but alert. Feathers gleamed beside scales. Fur gave way to patches of translucent skin that shimmered like wet glass. Each one different, each one alive, Rose whispered. They're beautiful. Maggie's voice cracked. They're wrong. In the far pen, a larger shadow moved. Slow, deliberate. Maggie's light caught it. A figure easily 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, its hide a blend of fur and smooth skin like leather. Its head was crowned with antlers that curved back like branches. It stepped forward on 4 limbs, then straightened onto 2. The light caught its face, long muzzle, deep-set eyes that gleamed with intelligence. Rose froze. "Mags!" "It's looking at me." The creature took another step. Maggie reached out, pulling her back. "Don't move." It stopped just beyond the threshold of its cage. The door was open. Chains snapped, metal twisted. For a long, terrible moment they stared at each other. Then slowly, the creature lowered its head in what looked almost like a bow. Rose's breath trembled. "He's not afraid. He?" Maggie hissed. Rose stepped forward only an inch, her voice soft. "Old Buck," Maggie blinked. "What?" "That's what Grandma used to call him," Rose whispered. "In her stories. The one who watched over the others. The guardian." Maggie stared at her sister, then back at the creature. Its gaze shifted from one to the other, assessing, measuring, and then it made a sound. A low, guttural tone that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. The syllables bent around breath like an attempt at speech. Rose's lips parted. "Did you hear that?" Maggie nodded numbly. "It's trying to talk." The creature's gaze fell to Rose's hand, the one she'd unconsciously extended toward it. It stepped closer, the light glinting along its fur, revealing old scars, stitches, the faint outline of ribs beneath the hide. When it stopped, only the width of a gate separated them. Its breath steamed in the cold air. Rose whispered, "You're not monsters, are you?" It blinked slowly. Then, impossibly, it mimicked her movement, lifting its arm. Its hand was rough and misshapen, but unmistakably human. Maggie grabbed her shoulder. "Enough, we're leaving now." But Rose's voice was soft, mesmerized. "He's not dangerous. Neither is fire until it spreads." They backed away, the creatures watching silently as they went. None followed. Not yet. When they reached the door, Maggie turned to look one last time. The barn's dim blue light flickered like a heartbeat. And in that pulse, she thought she saw the shape of Etta May standing near the far wall. Or maybe it was just a trick of the glow and dust. Outside, the air felt too thin, too sharp. Maggie closed the doors and dropped the broken padlock into the dirt. Rose was trembling. "She wasn't mad," she whispered. "Grandma wasn't crazy. She did it. She saved them." Maggie stared out toward the mist-choked woods. "She made them, Rose. You don't save life by twisting it." Rose shook her head. "You don't destroy it either." For a long time neither spoke. Then a sound drifted from behind the doors, a soft scraping like movement inside, followed by a slow, measured thump and another, the rhythm of steps. Rose turned back, eyes wide. "They're following us." Maggie took her arm. "Keep walking." They didn't run. Not until the barn lights flickered off all at once, plunging it into darkness. When they reached the porch, Maggie risked one glance back. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the structure whole. But just before it vanished from view, a tall shadow stepped into the doorway. Still, silent, watching them go, and then came the sound. Faint but unmistakable, a low, drawn-out murmur. Almost a word, "Rope." By nightfall, the house felt smaller. Every wall seemed to listen, every floorboard carried a pulse. Maggie had locked every door and window, though she wasn't sure it mattered. The forest itself seemed alive, whispering with soft movement that never stopped. Rose sat at the table surrounded by Etta May's journals. Her fingers trembled as she turned a page, but her eyes burned with something like devotion. "She wasn't hiding monsters," she said quietly. "She was protecting her work." "Protecting them?" Maggie stared at her. "Protecting them from what? From us?" "Rose, they shouldn't exist." Rose didn't flinch. "Maybe we shouldn't either. Not the way we've treated the world." Grandma saw what was coming. Extinction, collapse. She tried to correct it by splicing humans and animals. Maggie snapped. "That's not correction, that's corruption." Rose looked up, her expression calm but distant. "Then why did he say my name?" The words hung heavy between them. Outside, thunder rolled again. The storm hadn't left the valley. It just circled, waiting. Maggie grabbed one of the notebooks and flipped through until she found a page filled with symbols and notations. You don't understand. She wasn't trying to fix nature. She was restarting it. Look at this. Hybrid gestation, gene sequencing, accelerated regeneration. She wasn't saving life. She was replacing it. Rose rose to her feet, eyes flashing. And maybe that's what we deserve. The lights flickered once, twice, then. The generator died with a sighing hum. Darkness swallowed the room. From somewhere outside came the creak of wood and the soft crunch of footsteps on wet earth. Maggie's stomach clenched. "Stay here," she whispered. "No," Rose said. "If it's him, he won't hurt me." Maggie grabbed her wrist. "Don't you dare!" But Rose was already moving toward the door. The rain had started again, thin and silver. The fog pulsed with faint blue light, the same light that had filled the barn. Shapes moved between the trees, slow and deliberate. Rose stepped off the porch, barefoot, her nightgown clinging to her legs. "I know you," she whispered into the mist. "You were hers. And now you're mine." The tall shadow emerged, antlers gleaming wet, eyes glowing like lanterns. It stopped a few feet away. Maggie stood in the doorway, frozen, unable to breathe. The creature bent its head slightly, like before. Rose smiled through tears. "It's okay. You're free now." But behind it more shapes moved, smaller ones, faster. The forest came alive with sound, breath, claw, whisper. Not all of them bowed. Maggie stepped forward. "Rose, get back!" 2 small points, like eyes. When she blinked, they were gone. That night, Maggie sat at the kitchen table, sorting through old bills and letters. Rose had gone to bed early, exhausted from the day. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. The house creaked. Somewhere out there, beyond the field, something called a sound halfway between a cry and a word. Maggie rose and went to the window again. The barn stood silent under the moonlight. But at its base, barely visible through the mist, was a mark she hadn't noticed before. A long, jagged claw mark running across the door. She swallowed hard, a chill creeping up her spine. And for just a moment, deep in the woods beyond, 2 faint lights blinked back. Not fireflies, not lanterns, but eyes, glowing softly in the dark. Marcus's hand tightened on the stair rail as the morning light filtered through the warped window glass. Dust motes drifted in the air, catching the pale sun like suspended ash. The old farmhouse woke slowly, groaning with the weight of memory. Downstairs, the floorboards creaked beneath Maggie's steady steps. She'd been up since dawn, sorting through Etta May's papers spread across the dining table, envelopes addressed in her grandmother's spidery handwriting, notebooks bound with fraying twine. Each page she opened only deepened her unease. Rose entered, barefoot and bleary-eyed, clutching her coffee mug. "You didn't sleep again?" "Couldn't," Maggie murmured. "This place feels like it's breathing." Rose half smiled. "Maybe it is." She said it like a joke, but her gaze shifted toward the back of the house, toward the barn. Maggie caught it and sighed. "We're not talking about that," she said, flipping another envelope. "Grandma's will said to leave it locked, so we're leaving it locked." Rose leaned against the doorway, the morning light soft on her face. "You saw the claw marks, too." "Yeah, and that's exactly why I don't want to know what's in there." By mid-morning, they had made a rhythm of their work. Maggie catalogued old receipts, deeds, and property maps, while Rose went through the attic, searching for anything worth keeping. The rain from the night before had left the air damp and heavy. The attic was just as they'd left it as children. Boxes stacked like forgotten tombstones, the smell of cedar and mildew thick as memory. Rose set her camera down and opened the first trunk. Inside were quilts, an old hymnal, and a photograph wrapped in tissue paper. The photo stopped her cold. It showed Etta May, decades younger, standing beside 3 men in government suits. A white laboratory in the background. The corner of the photo bore a faded stamp, Cold Creek Project, 1962. Rose frowned and carried it downstairs. "Mags, you should see this." Maggie looked up from the pile of papers. The black and white image caught the light like a ghost. Cold Creek Project. She read aloud. "That sounds like some kind of research program." Rose pointed at one of the men. "Recognize him?" Maggie squinted. "No, but Grandma looks proud and nervous." They turned the photo over. On the back, written in Etta May's looping script, were 5 words: "Preserve creation." "Never destroy life," Maggie exhaled slowly. Whatever she was doing, she believed in it. That night the strange sounds returned. Maggie had gone to bed early, but the rhythmic humming woke her. It wasn't the wind this time. It had a pattern, mechanical, almost musical, coming from deep within the barn. She slipped from bed, heart thudding, and padded into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of ozone, like before a storm. Rose was already standing at the window, pale in the moonlight. "You hear it too?" Maggie whispered. Rose nodded. "It started an hour ago." "Won't stop." Maggie leaned beside her. The barn glowed faintly, a dim blue shimmer leaking through the slats, pulsing in rhythm with the sound. "That can't be possible," Maggie murmured. "There's no power out there. The generator's been dead for years. Maybe Grandma wired something else," Rose said, almost reverently. "Something she never told anyone about." Maggie grabbed her flashlight. "We'll check it in the morning." "I'm not going out there at night," but Rose didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the barn, wide and glassy. "Mags," she whispered, "I think something's calling my name." Morning came slow and grey. The air was thick with mist and the metallic scent of rain. Maggie made coffee, while Rose thumbed through the attic trunk again. Beneath the photo she'd found earlier lay several small journals bound in cracked leather. The first page read, "E.M. Harlow, 1965, Cold Creek Termination Report, personal copy." Rose flipped through pages filled with sketches of bones, spliced organs, and diagrams of genetic cross-sections annotated in scientific shorthand. Downstairs, Maggie was talking to someone at the door. The deep, familiar voice carried up the staircase. "Sheriff Tucker?" Rose called, descending the steps. The sheriff stood just inside the doorway, his hat dripping from the rain. His uniform looked older than it should have, the badge dulled to bronze. He gave a small, respectful nod. "Morning, girls. Heard you two were back." "Word travels fast," Maggie said, forcing a polite smile. "In these parts, it always does." He glanced around the room, the scattered papers, the half-open boxes. "Looks like you're settling in." "Trying to," Maggie replied. "If we can get through all this." Tucker scratched his beard. "I was up by the ridge this morning. Found deer tracks in the mud, but they weren't right. Toes too long, spread too wide. Thought I'd check you girls were doing all right." Rose exchanged a look with Maggie. "We're fine," she said quickly. "Good." He tipped his hat. "Still, I'd keep the doors locked. Folks in town been talking about strange noises. Even seen lights near your barn." Maggie's jaw tightened. "We've noticed." Tucker hesitated at the door. Etta May was a good woman, but she was mixed up in things she shouldn't have been. Smartest person I ever met, and loneliest too. "You girls stay careful. Some secrets die hard up here." He left without waiting for an answer. That evening, the sisters sat together in the parlor, the journals spread between them. A storm brewed outside, thunder rumbling through the valley. Maggie turned a page and froze. The entry read, "They called it Project Preserve Genesis. We were told it was about restoration, reintroducing what mankind had erased. But the others, they went too far. They wanted to play God. When they shut us down, I took what I could save. The embryos, the formulas. My children, they'll call them monsters. But I call them mercy." Rose traced the ink with trembling fingers. "She wasn't just keeping animals, Mags. She was making them." Maggie rubbed her temples. "This is insane. These could be sketches for fiction or hallucinations from her illness." But she didn't believe it. "Not fully." Rose looked up. "Then what was that light last night?" Before Maggie could answer, a low sound rippled through the house, a deep vibration, subtle at first, then growing until the floor itself seemed to hum. They both stood. The sound was coming from the walls. Maggie pressed her ear against the plaster. It wasn't a vibration. It was movement. Something small and quick scurrying between the studs. "Rats," she offered weakly. Rose shook her head. "Too heavy." The humming stopped as abruptly as it began. Then from upstairs came a soft thump. They turned toward the staircase. "Mags." Maggie grabbed the flashlight again, her pulse thudding in her throat. The attic door at the top of the stairs was swinging slowly open, the latch unhooked. She climbed one creaking step at a time. Rose followed, clutching the railing. The attic was dark, the single bulb overhead flickering with a sickly yellow light. The air felt charged, electric. Something had moved the old trunk, dragged it 3 feet from where it had been. The lid was still open, its contents scattered, and on the floor beside it, half buried in dust, lay a small bone, smooth, white. Too human-shaped to be animal. Too small to belong to an adult. Rose knelt, her breath hitching.
Mags, what is that?
Maggie swallowed hard. I don't know. But we're done for tonight. They closed the attic door and locked it. Later, as the storm broke and rain lashed against the roof, Rose dreamed. In her dream, the barn door opened slowly, chains snapping like brittle twine. Light spilled out, blue and soft, pulsing like a heartbeat. From within came shapes that weren't quite animal, weren't quite human, and one of them whispered her name when she woke. Her window was open, and on the porch below, gleaming wet with rain, lay the old padlock from the barn door. Morning broke in silence. The kind of silence that feels held, like the mountain was waiting for something. Fog rolled through the hollows, swallowing the trees, until the world beyond the porch was nothing but a pale blur. Maggie stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, staring down at the porch boards where the padlock still lay. The metal was slick from rain, its shackle split clean through. No rust, no wear, just a perfect, unnatural break. She crouched and picked it up, cold, too cold for morning air. Rose appeared behind her, hair tangled, face pale. I didn't dream it, did I?